What's up, guys? Cass here from GiveWave Studios, and today I'm going to teach you guys how to turn all these parts you see here into this cute little PORG from Star Wars The Last Jedi right here, complete with movable head and detachable head. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so for starters, we're going to look at our 22 pieces that this comes with, and we're going to start by making the head first. So the head is going to be comprised of these two smaller strip pieces and these two smaller kind of like half circular pieces. You can see that I've already labeled mine here. You're going to get a sheet in your DIY kit that lets you know front, back, left, right, and all of that. So just transfer all that information over to your parts and you'll be all set. So, all right, so once we have our pieces, what we're going to do is we're going to heat everything up. So we're going to grab a heat gun, and grab something circular. It could be your elbow, it could be your knee, something circular you have at the shop. I have a little thing that I use in here to put circles around my stuff. And basically, once you want to give this kind of like a dome-ish type of shape, you can even kind of go in and pull away from the center and curl in the edges a little bit. So basically you want something like this as opposed to this flat piece that you see here. And we're basically going to do that for all of the parts, these four, and then we're going to put everything together with glue. So on these thin strips, it's a little hard to get much of a curve going on it. So what you want to do is just kind of like fold it kind of like down its spine in the middle, and then just kind of curl it onto itself a little bit, so that it gets this just kind of like croissant type of shape. So one thing that I forgot to mention earlier before you started, and hopefully it's visible when I put them next to each other. Now you guys will notice that this blue is almost the same blue as the top here. And it doesn't matter if your foam comes blue, green, purple, pink, white, black, doesn't matter. It's always gonna have this kind of like burnt color because all the parts that you get in your kit are laser cut. And then this here is just me going in with like a fine grit sandpaper and just fuzzing that out until it feels as smooth as the top right here. And the reason for this is that this burnt edge doesn't glue well to itself. This does. So do this to all of these edges on all of your parts. These are already pre-made, but I left this out just so you guys could see it. All right, so with all our parts, edges sanded, we're gonna start putting this together. So usually I start with the middle pieces and attaching those together, and then I'll do the sides. And it's pretty simple. You've seen my tutorials before, you know the drill. We're gonna put barge, contact cement, right on our sides here. Don't put too much, just kind of like, what I like to do is call it the ketchup method. So I just kind of put a nice big bead right down the middle, and then I will grab like a scrap piece, you know, you can do like a hard cardboard or something that's stiff, and you're just gonna like spread on the edge there. So you don't want to put too much glue, but you really want to make sure that all of your edges are nice and soaked, because that's going to be where your seams are going to show, and we want to make this as seamless as possible so that we have less sanding to do at the end of the day. So I'm going to do the same to this side, and then we're going to glue it together. I'll fast forward through that step, and I'll catch you guys at the next step. Alright, so I'm going to take my time with this piece just to kind of show you guys what's going on. So I have pretty much 3/4 of it done already. I'm going to go ahead and start at my plus edges and glue these together. Alright, once that's made contact, I'm just slowly touching the outer edges of the foam first so that I can make it as seamless as possible. and then just kind of working my way around the rest of it. Touch edge, move, touch edge, move, touch edge, move. Right? I'm gonna do this all the way around until I get back to the end. And then just kind of push everything back together. Now, if you notice that, let's say your foam is trying to separate a little bit, one thing that I like to do is I'll grab some tape. It could be any type of tape, as long as it's not like duct tape that's gonna like destroy the foam. And what I'm gonna do is put some tape on one side, push the foam up against itself, and while it's pushed up against it, tape it. So I'm basically like stitching it. I like to call this stitching the foam. So places that look like they want to separate, I'll do that. So right here at this beginning edge, I'm gonna do that. I'll probably carry this over to that and do that. All right, so the process for the body parts are very much the same as what we just did for the head. So I'm not gonna go over it in detail, just gonna fast forward through putting this together, and we'll move on to the next steps. Before I skip over this completely, do remember to do your middle parts first and then do your side pieces. Or if you don't want to work that way, just make sure that the edge that is convex touches the edge that is convex. Don't reverse it and put the convex edge on this convex edge. It goes convex to concave. All right, so mountain to valley, and then in the middle is mountain to mountain. All right. All right, so now that we have our two pieces, you're gonna notice that on the body, there's one part that has a little bit more of a butt than the other. So it's just kind of like, if you notice, there's kind of like an angle going on here. And what that's going to do is the back of the head has that same angle. So the two most obtuse parts just kind of like touch each other. This becomes kind of like the back where the neck connects to the back. And then this is the front of the PORG, which is kind of pretty flat, right? So let's take it to the next step. So I grab my Dremel and set myself to kind of like a medium speed. And I'm gonna start taking out the material on the inside here. Just putting the Dremel at an angle and sanding away at the inside. I'm gonna give you guys a sense of overall. You wanna go about like a 1/4 of an inch in at an angle so that your outer edge becomes super thin, but your inside stays like super angled. So, okay, so let's do a little focus here. All right, so this is what you're going for, right? You see that lip? It's just kind of like fades right out to its edge right there, right? As opposed to this thickness. And you're going to do that all the way around. Now, all right, so once you're done, the inside should look like this all the way around. So that by the time you grab your PORG body and fit those together, that should be a nice snug fit. You start to see the general shape. All right, and because of that beveled edge, now your neck starts to have a little bit of mobility. Okay, so next up we're gonna do the little mustache and mouthpiece. Okay, and while we still have our Dremel out, what we're gonna do is put it at a relatively low speed, and we're going to just kind of attack the edges there and round off the edge. Do that all the way around. This is a DIY kit. My instructions are more so guidelines than rules. So, you know, if you feel like you want it to be different, you want it to be a little bit more puffy, you want it to be less puffy, all up to you how much of this you do and what your final shape ends up looking like. Or if you do it at all, really. All right. So by the time you're done dremeling, you're gonna end up with like this nice smooth transition between the surface and the edge, right? Unlike here, you can see the progression here, or you can compare this piece to that piece, right? And that's what you want all the way around. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip through this step because the process is pretty much the same. You're going to do the same thing for this lip, the lower jaw or lower lip part right here, and I'll catch you guys at the next time. Alright, so we have our mouthpiece nice and dremeled all the way around, and we have our bottom piece nice and dremeled all the way around as well. So right now what we're going to do is stop playing around with pieces of foam, and we're going to the same thing we did for the inside of the head here, we're going to do for the back of the mouth, and we're going to do for about three quarters of the way up the little mustache piece here. So you're looking at probably around here to there. This will change. Again, this is one of those things that you are in charge of. You pick how much or how little of it you do. But if I were to put my head together real quick, what I would want to do is figure out where you guys want that mouthpiece to be, right? And usually this should end up like right about here somewhere. So we're looking at somewhere like this, right? And what we're doing with that is that we're fading this back piece out so that it can sit nice and flush on the body, just like the head does here. All right, so that's why we have that. So I'm gonna fast forward through the process of just going with the Dremel tool and sanding that off to the edge, very similar to what we did on the inside of this, and then I'll catch you guys at the next step. So we see that nice descent there on this piece. You can kind of see it here too, how it just kind of fades out. Fades out, it goes from thick to not so thick. And while you're doing this with the Dremel, you can also do this with sandpaper. It'll take a lot longer, obviously. But while you're doing this with the Dremel, be super careful with your edge because it will turn it over and snag and catch it. So the closest you could hold it, the better. You can kind of see I got caught a little bit here, so I'll go over and finish this by hand to kind of smooth it out. But yeah, so just be careful of that. Now that I have this piece, we can kind of start gluing this together and figuring out the head. All right, so we're gonna grab our head, and remember the part that is the shortest, right? So this is kind of like the back, this is the front. See that curve? So right here, this is gonna be where our mouth is gonna be, our lower piece of the mouth. And this part is pretty thin. So you're probably not going to be able to do too much beveling to this, and because of that, let this dictate how far this falls. So for me, it's right about there. You can see that it's not too much of a fall off, but that's where I know I want to put the mouth, because that's where my bevel, that's where I got my bevel to. You can do it more if you'd like to, but safer is better than sorry on this one, because this is, again, a really small piece. So once I got this down, I can leave that off, and I can figure out where I want the mouth to be. Now these guys always have kind of like a little bit open mouth type of thing going on, so I'm placing the upper lip a tiny bit above where the lower lip is. It's kind of like that, and making sure that I center it with that line. Just figure it out right there. All right, so I'm gonna hold this in place, and I'm gonna trace where this is going to fall. Right around there. All right, and I can even go in and do like the extra area in the mouth right there. All right, so more or less, this is where our pieces are gonna be, and then literally now we're just gonna glue it together. So I'm gonna fast forward through this process with the barge, and then we'll move on to the next step. Actually, before we move into barge, this is now the perfect time to sand off your seams if you're gonna do it, because once we start gluing stuff to this, it's gonna be super hard to get around really close to where these things are. So you can do this with your Dremel, you can do this with a sanding stick, you can do it with, you know, sandpaper by hand. Just clean off your seams if you feel the need to, and then you can start gluing your pieces together. So I'm not even gonna go over that step, I'll skip it all together. It's pretty self-explanatory. Grab your Dremel, clean off your edges a little bit, and then just make sure you reheat the foam once you've exposed or fuzzied it up. All right. we've got that put on, right, as you can see. You can get yourself some googly eyes. Well, this used to be a googly eye. I destroyed the back of it so I could use it as a mold, because I have some resin in here right now. I just pop them out when I'm done. But this is about a 1-inch googly eye, I believe. And if you're not sure where to put the eyes, it's pretty easy. If you look at the little nose here that you have on your piece, and you draw a line kind of going next to it, but still kind of parallel to the center. So right there, that tells you like how wide apart the eyes are going to be. All right, so next step is probably going to be the most difficult part of this build, which are going to be the wings. These are going to require a lot of sanding, because what's happening is we're going to be sanding this down super thin here along this edge, and also super thin here along the bottom edge. But in the middle, we kind of want to keep the thickness of this 10mm foam. So you can definitely do this with a Dremel. I'm gonna show you guys how I do it on the machine. I have a sander back there that I'm gonna do it with for time's sake, but you can definitely do this with a Dremel. It's just gonna take a little bit more time and finesse, all right? Okay, one of the first steps that you can do actually before we go to the big machine is you can actually start, make sure that your wings are opposite each other, okay? And you can actually start Dremeling your edges, just like we did earlier with the upper lip and the lower lip. You're going to kind of soften the top edges of your piece. So you want to do that first. You guys saw how I did this before. It's the same process as earlier. So we're taking all of our pieces, we're softening the edge and taking it, softening the top or the sides and taking it straight to the edge. All right. So we're gonna end up with something that more or less looks like this. I kind of fast forwarded through the process a little bit and probably faded through this because it takes a while. There's no point of going through all of it, but it's the same thing. Slowly, when you get to the tip of your wing and it starts to be kind of small here, you really want to hold it tight because the Dremel will snag onto it, and that's not what you want. Okay, like that. All right, so this is kind of what you should end up with as a piece, right? You see that the middle of the wing is nice and thick, the edge is thin, the top is thin, okay? And then what we're gonna do is on the back side or the front side, whichever side you guys are more comfortable with, you're just gonna kind of fade it in. So you're gonna make it a lot thinner here and a lot thinner here and kind of leave the thickness there a little bit. This is definitely something that you can do with the Dremel. It takes a minute. I'm not gonna go through it myself personally. I'm gonna use a sander, but the process is gonna be the same. So I'll walk you guys through that step. Okay, just so you guys get a better sense of what I'm talking about. So this is our original piece. This is our new piece. Okay. See, it's faded at the top, faded at the bottom. So tip of the wing and kind of like shoulder area, right? So I Dremeled the inside of this, kind of faded it to a point. Did the same thing here. You can kind of see there's kind of a curve to it. Did the same thing towards the bottom of the wing, the top side and the bottom side, while leaving the middle piece more or less untouched. I mean, obviously, I had to just kind of blend everything in, so you do lose a little bit of thickness overall. But as long as this is, you know, a lot thicker than the top and the bottom, that's exactly what you want. All right, so we got both our wings, nice and faded at the top, nice and faded at the bottom, thick in the middle, okay? And we're just gonna heat this up, give it some curve, and test it out on our body, make sure everything works. We'll fast forward. All right, so at this point, you just tape your head to your body. It doesn't have to be pretty, just make sure the head doesn't move while you're going through this process. And what you're gonna do is grab a piece of tape, put it off to the side, and you're gonna figure out where you want your wings to be. You want see this curve here? This curve needs to face front. So this is the front of the wing. So you're gonna want to kind of do something like that. The arms kind of go pretty parallel, not parallel, but like they go almost horizontal to the head, back towards the body. But you guys can give it some personality and put it off to the side. It's really up to you at this point. I'm gonna go with what's more screen accurate to me, which is kind of this angle right here. So with this here, I'm gonna hold that in place. Notice that I have a little bit of this going over the head, and that is where I intend on gluing it to the inside of the head. So I'm gonna go ahead and roughly trace out where that's going to be, right there on my sides. All right, and I have about this much. I have about this much going inside the head. That's gonna get glued to the head so that it, the whole thing's removable from the body, if you want to make it removable, obviously. And then we have this side. Now that we have our tracing, all we have to do is just kind of eyeball it and make sure that it's somewhat parallel to the other side. So I'm just kind of going back and forth, visually getting a sense of where all of this sits, and then I'm going to put my tracing on there. And also put where it is that it's being glued. Alright, so I don't know if you guys can tell where my lines are. That's how much of it is going to get glued to the inside of the head, and then the rest is going to be outside the body. Alright, so now let's assemble this. Your contact cement. Make sure you don't glue these opposite now. Alright, this isn't the front. It's the back. This is the front. This pointy curve faces forward. Alright, so I'm going to go into my head, place this in here, and just glue that in place. All right, now at this point, you could glue this also to the body if you don't want to have a moving head. All right, so now let's move on to the feet. Okay. These thin ones are going to be the top of the feet. These thicker ones, the bottom of the feet. These are the little membranes, or what end up looking like toes. And you don't have to do this if you don't want to. Again, it's just one of those extra detail things that's there in case you want to do it. So there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. As you can see, let's focus here. This one is really faded and very angular, which means that you get less of like a toe shape in the front and more like a gradual look. This will give you, this is easier to make, first of all, and it'll give you a little bit more of a bump in the front to make it look like, you know, bulgy little toes. But whichever method you do, I think the thing that's the most important is just kind of round off the edges a little bit so that you don't have sharp angles. So one or the other, it's up to you. If you have your own technique, definitely by all means feel free. This is a kit, and my instructions really are just kind of guidelines for you guys. All right, so have fun with it. All right, so notice how this ends up coming together. It's like a little bit of a jumbled mess over here, which is fine because we're gonna cut this area off, these sections off as we had planned. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do the other one and show you guys how to put the cover. So if I'm taking my time, you'll notice that I put glue on the entirety of the surface of the foot. Okay, and then you can start with whichever toe you want. I like to do the middle, put some glue on this other toe right here, nice and close to the edge, and put that down. Now, notice that I still have a little bit of room on either side of the toe. Okay, this is super important because when we put this down on top, we're going to need an edge for the corresponding edge to actually glue onto. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're putting these together. All right, so now that we have that, I'm gonna go ahead and grab my cut knife. I'll start with this one. And the reason for making these cuts here is to leave room for the stem of the leg when we place it on. Okay, so you're gonna grab your piece. Once you have it flipped and it's exactly in the same orientation, just keep that in mind and heat this up. Be careful not to burn yourself. It's a really small piece. All right. Once you have this somewhat heated up, what we're gonna do is pull and expand it a little bit. So you're kind of like widening it all over. You're widening the toes, you're widening the middle of the foot, you're widening the back of the foot, widening the whole thing. And then you're gonna lengthen it. So pull lengthwise, just a little bit. Don't put too much pressure at this point because you could break it. All right, put some. All right, so this part's a little tricky, but not impossible. I'm gonna go ahead and come a little closer with you guys. And so I'm gonna start with, either left or right, but the outer edge, okay? And I'm going to put this down on its edge. I'm gonna wrap this over and put it down on the other side. You might have to pull a little bit to get this to stick to its other side. Okay, I'm gonna put this down in the front of the toe, wrap that over to the other side, other toe. All right, and we're placing these right up against their edges. The other side. Go ahead and bring it to that other side. You can tell I'm just wrapping it towards that edge. And this back piece, you don't want to glue this just yet. Just kind of keep that open. And now you're going to go in with your nails, and you can just kind of sink your nails in between that middle foam there and the black foam. You're just kind of carving and bringing out the shape that's underneath there of the fingers that we just put down. That way they're very defined in between them. And you start to get something like that, a little bit more dimensionality to it. Okay, so we left this open, and the reason why we left this open is because where we had done this cut here, which we can kind of tell just by pushing on it and feeling up on where it is, we're gonna just cut like a little smiley face out of that section. All right. And then press this down into place with everything else. All right. And what that does for us really is just allow a spot for the leg to get glued, but it also kind of makes it look like it's fading into the leg. So just a nice little detail that gives continuity from the foot to the leg. Again, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but it is a nice touch. All right, so that's pretty much the assembly for the foot. I'm gonna move on and fast forward through the next step. Okay, so with both of our feet done, I'm gonna go ahead and go back to the Dremel and sand off our edges a little bit, just round them off, just a little bit nice and smooth. Right. These sharp angles are just a little bit smoother on the sides and in the middle. It depends on how small of a Dremel tip you have. You can kind of get into the crevices or not. All right, that's pretty much it. So once we're done with that, I'm gonna grab your included foam tubes that come with the kit, and we're just gonna glue this in place. And put glue down, put glue down, stick together. Same barge process we've been doing before. And don't forget to put a little bit in the front of your leg so that it glues a little bit to the trench that we created for the foot. So right there. Just go there and stick that right there. And done. We have a leg. Gonna do the same thing for the other one and move on to the next step. Once you've done your two legs, you can reinforce it. As you can see here, I kind of have a hole drilled into it. Basically, I used my Dremel and then at like a medium speed, kind of drill into the foam. Just be really careful it doesn't come out the outside of the leg. So from time to time, take it out, bring it back in, and then just go as deep as you can. You probably won't be able to go all the way through unless you have a really, really long bit. But with the rest of the way that it didn't, just force this into it and just kind of puncture the foam all the way through. You can put it down on the table and push it down until you feel it on the underside of the leg. So I have some reinforced legs. Again, an extra step. You don't have to do this if you don't want to or don't have the means. It's not absolutely necessary. All right, we're gonna move on to the next step. And now it's time for the second most difficult part of this build, which is trying to find a balance for our little porgy character here. The tubes that I send you guys are a little longer than they need to be. So you have about half an inch that you're gonna want to be inside the body so that the legs are proportionate on the outside. So you can mark yourself half an inch from top down of your legs. And now that we have this, it's probably easier for us if we take out our stems right now. You can also just put some tape down on your table to make sure that your legs don't move during this process. Keep them where they're supposed to be. Okay. Put some tape down, and what you're gonna want to do is make sure that the legs are going straight up. And you're just gonna start moving this around and kind of placing it and seeing where it wants to fall. If it wants to fall front, if it wants to fall back, because you're going to want the body to tilt a little bit forward. And I feel like I found somewhat of a balance here. Okay. It's gonna be different for everyone, so just kind of keep playing around with it until you find where it wants to be. And once you have, just kind of put a mark on the outside of the leg, because that's easier to reach, right? So I have my 2 marks here, so I know that more or less the feet land right here. And if you want to be super precise about it, you can definitely measure from this center line to either side to get like an exact distance between the two. Once you have that, again, with the cap of your Sharpie, just go ahead and make a mark. Just kind of push down and twist, measure out the distance between these two. You can use a ruler, but if you grab something on the table, for example, the metal rods that you had, and just kind of flip it to the other side with that mark, then I know that where that mark was, this is where I need to start my circle. So I can go in and dig that right in there. That tells me exactly where that leg should be. Okay. Once we have that, obviously grab your Xacto knife and start digging inside of the lines of the impressions that you just made, because at the end of the day, you want your cutout hole to be smaller than your legs' diameters, because that'll ensure a nice snug fit. As long as you make sure that your cuts are inside of your impression, that's really all that matters for this step. Okay, so I had some really rough cuts, so I'm definitely gonna take my own advice and dig my Dremel into there a little bit. Okay, and I want to dig straight up. Okay, right here. All right, that's done. Go ahead and take my legs off the table. Remember, we had marked our 1/4 inch depth before. Do the same thing here. So you'll play around with this until you get it to work out for you. I think more or less right there is where I have a balance point. All right. Looking good. Now, let's move on to the eyes. Like I said earlier, you can grab some 1-inch googly eyes and glue them directly on the surface, obviously once you're done painting. Or if you want a little bit more of a realistic look, you can do these cutouts first and then just kind of stick it back in from the inside. So this is what we're gonna do now. Go ahead and grab my blade and cut through. Again, cutting inside your lines because you want your hole to be smaller than the piece you're trying to fit through, so that it has a nice and snug fit at the end of it all. All right, so we've got that out. And so if I were to go try to put this in there, just kind of squeeze it through. Okay. And then once it's kind of midway, just kind of force those edges to just embed themselves in between the foam, like that. All right. I like this look more personally. It looks more natural. It looks like it's coming out of the foam as opposed to just putting it on top, because then you get this edge of the googly eye there, which it's a personal preference, really. You guys can go either way. All right, so that's it for the eyes. Gonna fast forward through the rest of the process, and then I'm gonna show you guys how to put in a spine so that the head can be movable or somewhat removable from the entire body. Okay, so you'll be receiving a couple of these scrap pieces also, and what you're gonna do is glue those together. All right, so with this made, now what we're gonna do is figure out this spine distance. I'm gonna grab some barge and I'm gonna put some at the bottom of our piece here. All right, and also put some on the inside. It's in there. You can see it in between the legs. Slide it all around. Okay. I'm gonna air this out. I'm gonna glue it together. All right. So as we're putting this spine down, I'm gonna bring it down so that it is coming out more or less in the middle of our opening right here. Okay. So right about there. So I'm gonna go ahead and push this down into place. It's not perfectly centered, but that's okay. Oh, I lost a leg while I was shaking this thing dry. All right, here we go. And also eventually you're gonna glue your legs into place, just so when you find that balance, you can just pour some hot glue in there, make sure it doesn't move. All right, so obviously our spine is way too long, okay? So first step we're gonna do is put the head next to the body, kind of like this, and get a sense of where the top of the head falls, and we're gonna cut out this chunk. So visually right there, just gonna make a quick mark with my nails, put this on the edge of my table, and then make that cut. Now hopefully this is still too much, but it lets me, all right, so yeah, exactly, it's still too much, but the head's inside now. So now you're basically just going about it just a little bit at a time. Still too much. Keep cutting. Small pieces. You try to do about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch at a time. Because if you go past it, you can always just re-glue an extra piece onto it. But it's easy to take off than it is to add on, because I don't send any magnets with this. So if you're doing it with magnets, keep in mind the width of your magnet and how much that's going to affect it. So right now I'm going to show you guys how to do this with just some Velcro, which is a lot more easily accessible to everyone than the neodymium magnets, which can get a little bit expensive. All right, so right there, I kind of have it so that it's barely touching, and I can feel it at the top that it's there, but my head can get sunken in exactly where it was before. So that's a good sign, so I'm gonna grab some Velcro real quick. All right, so I'm gonna grab my one piece, stick it to the bottom, the top of the spine. But first I'm gonna put some barge to there. This glue actually reacts quite nicely to the barge, because if you put it on the foam directly, it's not gonna have a good amount of strength. So when you pull the head apart, you might just end up pulling the Velcro off as well with it. But if you put some barge where the Velcro is meant to go, give that enough time to dry. And then I cut this a little bigger than it needed to be, so I'm gonna put it right up against the edge. With that down, I'm gonna take out the opposite piece. Okay. And then grab some scissors and cut out the excess. There. Right up against their edges. Okay. All right. So I have that, and my inside piece, I'm gonna leave it big on purpose because sometimes you might miss. So you don't want it to be exact. All right. So I got my inside piece. I'm gonna sprinkle some contact cement on the inside of my head, down the middle. I'm gonna do a good amount in there, you can see. All right. And while making sure that everything is nice and centered, we're gonna go ahead and slide our head in and eventually make contact with the top of our spine there on the inside. And now what we have is the ability to move this guy's head a little bit and have it still be attached. All right. And if we pull apart, we should be able to just take that out. Perfect. All right. Obviously, the magnet is a lot smoother and nicer. The Velcro has a little bit more force on it, but if you don't stick it all the way down, it's super easy to take off. Right? So just a little bit of contact, and it comes right off. All right. So that's that for our little spine. This also completes our assembly tutorial for this GiveWave Studios DIY PORG kit from Star Wars The Last Jedi. I didn't go over painting because I feel like it's a pretty straightforward process as far as painting is concerned. Let me know in the description if you guys want me to do a second video covering painting. But overall, as long as you have everything sanded down, nice and smooth, you do a couple of coats of Plasti Dip, you do a nice white primer base, you can go ahead and by hand start painting everything on here. All right, and don't forget about your eyeballs, depending on how you're gonna do them. If they're gonna be on the surface on the inside, do remember that it's easier to put them in through the inside than it isn't just dropping them in. All right, so this is Cass from GiveWave Studios. I hope this was useful to you guys. I hope it was helpful, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Cheers.